This Rocky Mountain Juniper is perhaps the most iconic tree here at Eisei-en. Now, some people love the tree, some people hate the tree, but I think it's definitely instantly recognizable as one of the staple trees here at the garden. It's got a weird angular design to it. The deadwood hangs out of the pot. The tenjin or apical gin sticks way out beyond the profile of the apex. But there's something interesting and unique about the angular nature of the plant and these excessive features on the tree that really make it stand out and make it, in my opinion, a very unique and beautiful tree, even though those features aren't what we might consider to be typical in bonsai art. Now, this tree was actually the very first plant that I purchased in anticipation of building and opening up our garden here in Nashville, Tennessee. As a matter of fact, I purchased the tree while I was still living in Japan prior to moving back to the States. The great guys over at Backcountry Bonsai out in Wyoming sent me photos of the tree right after it was collected off the mountains, and I instantly fell in love with the weird character of the plant and purchased it from them. But it wasn't until a couple years later when I came back to the States that I went out there, picked up the tree, saw it in person for the first time, and realized that this was going to be one of those trees that really stood out at my nursery in the future. And I think that that has come to fruition over the long run here.
Yeah, we'll just set this in there and coming down. All right, watch the curve here.
Yep.
Okay. All right, so I'm hooked here. Okay, here we go. Awesome. Bring it around. Push. Perfect. Look at that beast. That is awesome. Oh, hell yeah. Absolutely.
I almost didn't sell it, but I was like,
I'm glad you did.
I sent a deal to Michael.
Now, after picking up the tree, I brought it back to Tennessee and waited one full year before working on the plant just to make sure that it survived the collection process and was very healthy. So the following winter, I started wiring and designing the plant, and really the initial design was kind of limited by the branches that were available at that time. So it ended up having a very triangular sort of, I would say kind of traditional type look to it, almost stereotypically triangular, kind of that scalene look to it with that initial setup. Now again, I was limited to what I had at the time, but as you can see, over time, the tree has grown out into this much more unique form with a very low dipping directional branch that's sort of set up underneath the canopy of the tree rather than protruding out to the side, which would be a rather typical design. Now, because the deadwood is very angular and very strange, I think having a bit more of a unique setup for the branch structure of the tree really ties in well with the look of the deadwood. But I did decide to go with a more traditional tokoname Japanese pot, this moko-shaped pot here for the tree, because I thought that it contrasted the angular lines of the tree so well, and it was juxtaposed to that more modern look of the plant. Now in 2021, I took this tree up to the US National Show in Rochester, New York, and put it on display in the exhibition. It was well received there. Despite not receiving an award, I think the general public and the bonsai community took to the tree, and again, some people either really loved it or really hated it, but it was definitely a standout example of a Rocky Mountain Juniper in that exhibition. Following the show, I brought it back to my nursery here in Tennessee and decided in the winter of this year that I was going to try to graft this tree. I was tired of working with the rocky foliage and thought, you know what, let's change this out to Itoigawa. I think it will make a much more spectacular looking tree. So I scion grafted the tree, put about 30 grafts on the plant, and to my dismay, over the course of this last growing season, all but 2 of the grafts failed, which typically doesn't happen for me here at the nursery. We usually have a very high success rate in the 80 to 85% range, but with this particular plant, there must have been some sort of genetic incompatibility with the scions that we were putting onto the tree. Now, I think in hindsight, it was probably a blessing in disguise that all of the grafts ended up failing, because to me it seems like the tree is kind of telling me that it wants to remain a Rocky. It should be a Rocky. It's one of our native trees here. It's a great representative of the species. Why change me, right? So I'm actually kind of glad to some degree that the grafts ended up not working out. And as a result of that, I've decided to rebuild the tree with its original foliage, rebuilding the structure of the pads, putting everything back into position. And I think it's going to take a little while to get it back to where it was this time last year for the national show, maybe one more growing season, for example. But the tree isn't so far gone that it's completely destroyed. This is part of the regenerative process of building a bonsai. And again, I think this tree is a good example of that and a good example of its species. So I'm glad that we're keeping it as Rocky Mountain Juniper.